Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome back to the FTX Crypto Cup tournament in 2022. We're following now a beautiful match from the day 4. It's now the world champion Magnus Carlsen versus Quang Liem, and they played really a spectacular game in their third game, in which I think the game became really a static one, really a blocked out one, and then eventually the game transposed into some wild tactical lines, which was really incredible. It was a huge surprise element here that in one particular moment Magnus Carlsen pulled off here. So it's really an interesting game, in my opinion, one of the best games so far in this super event. So let's see now what happened. Here Magnus, as we said, played with the white pieces and Quang Liem with the black pieces. Magnus opened with the move knight to f3. We have knight to f6 by Quang Liem. We have g3, and after move d5 bishop to g2, the game transposes into the King's Indian attack. In the King's Indian attack, it's like you're playing the King's Indian defense but with +1 tempo, and I like to play sometimes the King's Indian attack because I myself like to play many times the King's Indian with the black pieces. So as I said, you're just playing on the same motifs and trying to get the best out of it, of course. So after move bishop to g2, we have now the move c6, and here Quang Liem is saying, okay, I will paralyze a little bit your activity here on the long diagonal, because in this attack, in the King's Indian attack, white is trying now to break the position with the move c4. Maybe if the position allows it, b4 b5 is just trying to get rid of this pawn chain here and activate now the light square bishop on this beautiful diagonal. So here the continuation, we have now kingside castling by Magnus, and now bishop to g4, and this becomes now the so-called Yugoslav variation of the King's Indian attack. The idea, I think, is it's clear here, because when you are playing too much on light squares, when you play really a nice light square grip sort of with the move e6, okay, you have a great protection of the d5 square, but the problem is, of course, the downside is that your bishop on c8 is paralyzed by its own pawn structure. So that's why the idea about this Yugoslav defense is to bring out the bishop and then to lock the positional light squares with the move e6, which is, I think, a solid defense. Basically, I don't think that white gained so much in the opening stage. So here the continuation, Magnus plays h3. We have bishop to h5, although in some lines also bishop to f3 is a nice possibility. So you should not be surprised even if your opponent takes out now after bishop to f3. Maybe e5 or e6 are opportunities here for black. So as I said, about here, after move h3, bishop to h5 was played by Quang Liem. He tried to stay with this light square bishop on the board. We have now c4. Magnus is breaking now the position as promised. As we said, we're trying here from white perspective to activate now the bishop on g2. If you take too early here, d takes c4, then queen to c2 could happen, knight to a3 could happen in order to recapture the knight. Knight to e5 is a decent opportunity. Of course, b5 is not working. You lose here the pawn on c6, so it's quite unpleasant. So that's why many times black is keeping the position in the center untouched, plays simply on his normal blockade idea, like Quang Liem here played with the move e6. So we have d4, bishop to e7, knight to c3. Again, I think d takes c4 is still too rushed because of the opportunity to play knight to e5. You didn't play so far with your knight here on d7. This is, I think, maybe slightly more accurate way to go. Knight to d7 first, and then to control further the e5 square, then maybe to play the move d takes c4. But okay, here the continuation, after move knight to c3, Quang Liem played first kingside castling, and Magnus plays now an interesting idea, knight to e5, because there's simply not a good square for the dark square bishop. If you play bishop to e3, it's simply passive. Bishop to f4 is also maybe not the most optimal piece for the bishop, because bishop to g7 will happen, maybe knight to h5, attacking the bishop on f4. If you play to g5, then h6 is going to happen, kicking away simply the bishop. So that's why Magnus is saying here, I have already a beautiful activity with my dark square bishop, and here he's trying now to finally get this bishop more and more actively into the game. So knight to e5. Here we have knight from f to d7 was played by Quang Liem, and now Magnus undermined a little bit this dynamics in the center of the board. And now comes what is, in my opinion, the first critical moment of the game. Here let's practice here a little bit some pawn trades in the center of the board. Maybe you can pause the video and try to see now with which pawn would you take here? With the C pawn or maybe with the E pawn? Which one is more correct? Maybe, as I said, just take your time and try to think about this position more. So, okay. Here, Quang Liem, I think, played his first mistake. He played first knight to e5, okay, d takes e5, but now what he did, he took with the e pawn, and that's, I think, now huge problem, because the game is becoming asymmetrical. You see, now we have here a 5 versus 3 pawn structure, pawn majority sort of by white against black's king here. But of course, okay, black is also 4 versus 2 situation on the queen side, but I think white's attack is much faster, because we will eventually play f4, g4, f5, e4 is even an opportunity, so this pawn will roll. So in my opinion, e takes d5 was a huge mistake. As we said, c takes d5 is much better. Okay, still white will have his fun with the move f4, but at least you have this e pawn that's competing at least here on the square f5. This was now critical moment in the continuation. As we said, e takes d5, and now Magnus is just letting these pawns rolling here, bishop to g6, f4, really cool here dynamics already on the king side. So Quang Liem tried to block out the position with the move f5. If you play here f6, for instance, if you try to break this space advantage, this very nice pawn on the 5th rank here by white, then you get probably f5, bishop to e8, then you see e6 is going to happen. In the near future we can play e4, knight to e4, so we can play maybe even some ideas of h takes g5 in the later, h6 g5 in the later stage of the game. So it's becoming quite an unpleasant game here for black. So as I said, that's why f5 by Quang Liem. We have bishop to e3. Here Magnus is not allowing some annoying checks by the bishop on c5, maybe by the queen on b6, so that's why Quang Liem played knight to a3. And now beautiful move here by Magnus Carlsen. He's applying the principle of the last piece that hasn't played so far. You see how Magnus is playing now with all of his pieces into the game. In the game, he's playing now a rook to c1. The problem is now this idea, bishop to c5, maybe to activate here your dark square bishop on this diagonal, maybe continue the pressure on this dark square diagonal, is not working, because you get a tactical, monstrous tactical shot here, knight to d5. So you can maybe take bishop to e3, knight to e3. Even if you don't take it out, you see, if you take maybe here the knight on d5, then your bishop is hanging, bishop to c5. Here we can take it out, and this is a much better position here for white. The pawn on d5 is weak. It's a position, I think, that you can resign. So this is not working. Rook to c1, the main goal maybe for black, the move bishop to c5 is not working. We have now king to h8, and now comes another critical moment of the game. Here Magnus Carlsen pulled off the tactic of the game. Maybe you can pause the video and try to see at least an interesting idea. This idea that Magnus Carlsen pulled off here is not maybe the most accurate one. The most accurate one that, for instance, the Stockfish engine is suggesting at home is the move g5, but Magnus Carlsen, I think, played even a better move that Stockfish would play. Magnus Carlsen, I think, spiced it up here really in a beautiful way, and that's, I think, the way to go when you're playing rapid chess. You have to create some dynamics, you have to create some kind of idea, and Magnus Carlsen pulled off here a monstrous tactical shot, knight takes d5. And here Quang Liem even escaped from this check, the potential check by the bishop here on d5, but it doesn't make any difference here, because after knight to d5, Quang Liem simply took, c takes d5, and now queen to d5. Magnus is also targeting now this other weak pawn on b7. Even if you try here something like rook to b8, look at this, this bishop is coming into the game, and here will simply take out also here the pawn on a7. So this is not working. So after move queen to d5, Quang Liem makes now a huge mistake, and this was now, I think, his main mistake in the game. He tried now b6. He sacrificed the rook back for the exchange, sort of. He tried to play a 2 minor piece versus rook middle game. A better way to go, and it's quite hard to see, but it's just some kind of a top engine move that Quang Liem should have played. It was the move knight to b4, but still it leads into very complicated line. Then queen to b7 could happen. So as I said, maybe even here to trade off first the queens, queen to d5, queen to d5, then maybe to play the move knight to b4. You're getting out of the range at least of any of these attacks. Then of course white can take, but at least you're escaping and you're hoping for the best. Still, I think black would also have chances, especially because of the beautiful piece activity. So this was maybe the only defensive way here to play first queen to d5, and then after bishop to d5 to play the move knight to b4. But unfortunately here for Quang Liem, he played b6, and Magnus accepts the challenge. Bishop to queen takes a8, queen takes a8, bishop to a8, rook takes a8, and now rook to d1 is coming now also actively into the game. So we have now king to g8. Quang Liem is trying now to get the king back into the game. We have e6, and this move I think was maybe really the first sort of mistake by Magnus Carlsen. Okay, this is an advanced pawn. This pawn is very annoying. It paralyzes also the potential king's route, the potential bishop route, but it's becoming now an isolated pawn. Here, if you don't play this move e6, you still have this beautiful pawn majority attack on the king side. You can play maybe some normal ideas, a3, b4, not allowing maybe this knight to come into the game. So maybe e6, a slightly rushed move sort of by Magnus Carlsen. But okay, he played e6. Now we have bishop to c5, rook to c3, and now rook to e8, and now rook to d5. So Magnus is now trying to continue his pressure here. Look at this, how now the pawn on e6 is becoming a huge problem. So if you take here rook to e6 too early, then you get this one, bishop to c5, then knight to c5, and g takes f5 is of course winning here, because you get the beautiful fork. So this is not working so far for Quang Liem to take the pawn on e6, but still it's becoming, I think, a huge positional problem now for Magnus Carlsen. So after move rook to d5, we have knight to b4 by Quang Liem. We have a rook to c5. Interesting idea here by Magnus Carlsen. So he sacrificed here the rook for the exchange. After b takes c5, he played now rook to d6, and this is really Magnus at his best, because look at this now. This pawn that I've called, of course, as a weakness is becoming now a huge strength. But as I said, here Quang Liem has the opportunity to compete here. He can play, of course, also himself c4, so he can get out of the range, and he can play maybe afterwards some ideas of knight to a2, c3, trading off. And the cool part is that the bishop here is still controlling the potential promotion here on e8. So the rook, I think, and the bishop can always defend this position, although we have to say this bishop is monstrous. This bishop will come into the game, will not allow also here the king to come on f8, but I think this is defendable. The engine gives here slightly edge for white because of this annoying pattern on e6, but I think this is a position that black could defend. But okay, here the continuation, rook to d6 was played by Magnus Carlsen. Now rook to c8 by Quang Liem. He's trying now to defend here this pawn on c5. Magnus took it anyway, because rook to c5 is not working, because you get a beautiful checkmate here combined with the rook and the pawn. So this is not working. Really wild stuff. So after move bishop to c5, we have now a5 by Quang Liem. Now a3. The knight is a little bit out of game, so here knight to c6 was played by Quang Liem, and now b4. a takes b4, a takes b4. You see how important it would have been if Quang Liem would have advanced already the pawn on c4. Okay, he was a little bit under time pressure, of course. Magnus Carlsen played here really in a brutal tactical way, but as we said here, a couple inaccuracies I think made here Quang Liem really unpleasant game. So here the continuation after a takes b4, f takes g4, but it doesn't change the position. Look at this, Magnus is just connecting further the pawns, has now here 4 connected pawns. We'll just let him roll here. In the continuation, we have bishop to e8, we have king to f2, rook to b8, attacking now the pawn on b4. We have f5, and here after move knight to b4 and g5. This is a perfectly drawish position. As we said, it is a little bit unpleasant to see these pawns marching to you, but you don't have to do anything here. You just let the pawns roll, and you're still waiting with the bishop and the rook, for instance, this pawn to come. If the position gets too, I think, complicated, and you can even sacrifice maybe here the bishop for maybe 2 pawns or something. As I said, the engine gives here equal chances for both sides, so this should be really a drawish position. But now Quang Liem made a huge blunder. He played now the move rook to b5, and he is attacking again the bishop on c5, but he forgot about this main issue, the problems on the 8th rank that Magnus Carlsen played here, rook to d8. In this position, Quang Liem resigned. So it's just a forced checkmate here. You cannot of course come here to f8 with your king. You cannot protect the bishop. If you take here, we'll just take it out and it's game over. So a really stunning game played by the world champion Magnus Carlsen. I was really surprised that he sacrificed so many times in the game. Not that we're not used to see Magnus Carlsen sacrificing so many times, but this was quite direct how he played, and really one of the best games in my opinion so far from the super event. So this means now that Magnus Carlsen is winning this event against Quang Liem, which means now that he is in the lead. I'm not sure how the game ended between Ramesh Babu Pragnanana and Levon Aronian. We will still wait, but if Prague will also win his game against Levon Aronian, then he could be also the leader combined with Magnus Carlsen. So far, Magnus played a brilliant and perfect tournament so far, won every of his games of this event so far. So congratulations, Magnus is again really in top shape. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting ideas of this Yugoslav variation of the King's Indian attack. If you want to see some other great games from this event, check out my coverage so far with some other great games that we have covered so far. Here are some links, and if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and what to say, chess is the best, of course.